The grand idea that no one understood. It started with a speech, not a gunshot. Somewhere in Washington, a group of men in suits decided the fate of a country they couldn't point to on a map. Their grand plan? Contain communism. Because apparently, if one small Asian nation turned red, the rest of the world would follow, like falling dominoes made of pure paranoia. The theory was simple. Stop one, save all. The execution? A bureaucratic fever dream. By the late 1950s, Vietnam wasn't even on the average American's radar. But to the Cold War strategists, it was the next battlefield in a global chess match that only they were playing. And when you see the world as a game board, you forget there are people on the squares. So, Washington sent in military advisors. Just a few hundred at first, to advise. But advice turned into action. Action turned into escalation. And before anyone could say quagmire, 500,000 Americans were slogging through rice paddies wondering what the hell they were doing there. The mission, that never existed. The goal was clear, at least on paper. Defend South Vietnam from communist takeover. Easy, right? Except no one bothered to define what winning looked like. Was it holding the capital? Securing the countryside? Destroying the North Vietnamese army? Or was it just not losing? Because that's what it became, a war fought to avoid embarrassment. The politicians couldn't back down, the generals couldn't explain success, and the soldiers couldn't tell friend from foe. It was like trying to play chess while blindfolded, and every pawn on the board wanted you dead. The world's richest army versus the poorest enemy. America entered Vietnam with swagger. After all, this was the military that beat the Nazis, crushed the Japanese, and invented the nuclear bomb. How hard could a jungle war be? Turns out very, because the enemy wasn't playing by the rules. The Viet Cong didn't have tanks, air power, or fancy uniforms. They had sandals made from tires, rifles older than their grandfathers, and an endless supply of determination. They weren't fighting for ideology. They were fighting for home. Meanwhile, America was fighting for an idea, one that got blurrier every month. The result? The mightiest military machine in history got stuck in the mud, literally and politically. The land that ate armies. Vietnam wasn't a country. It was a trap disguised as geography. Swamps that swallowed boots, jungles thicker than guilt, and weather that felt like punishment. It rained so hard it could drown optimism. Helicopters were gods in the sky, until fog rolled in and turned them into expensive lawn ornaments. Engines clogged, guns jammed, and morale melted faster than ice in Saigon. Every step forward meant another inch deeper into hell. The U.S. didn't just invade Vietnam. It trespassed into a place that refused to be conquered. Everybody had a plan, until reality arrived. Back home, Washington drew arrows on maps. Secure this region. Clear that village. Sweep and hold. In reality, the villages were people's homes. The regions were jungles that no one had ever mapped. And clear and hold meant burning a place down and leaving the ashes behind. The soldiers on the ground followed orders that made sense on paper, but paper doesn't bleed. The enemy didn't march in formation. They hid, struck, and disappeared. Every battle looked like victory, until the next ambush made it meaningless. And the Pentagon still called it progress. The body count era begins. Since America couldn't define success, it decided to measure it. In corpses, every report, every news briefing, every general's pep talk came with numbers. Enemy casualties, 1,200. U.S. casualties, 30. Great ratio, terrible logic. Because it didn't matter how many the U.S. killed, the Viet Cong kept replacing them. The idea that Vietnam could be beaten by attrition was like thinking you could drain the ocean with a straw. But the reports kept coming, the charts kept rising, and the truth kept dying. A war built on denial. At the Pentagon, optimism was mandatory. No one wanted to be the first to say, "This isn't working." So they doubled down, then tripled down. Generals promised light at the end of the tunnel. Spoiler, it was napalm. Every failure was rebranded as temporary setback. Every protest at home was labeled unpatriotic, and anyone asking why got drowned out by speeches about freedom and duty. Vietnam stopped being a war and became a performance. One where the audience stopped clapping long before the actors realized the play was over. The soldiers' reality check. Out in the jungle, none of the slogans mattered. Every day was survival. Every mission, a gamble. Soldiers fought for inches of ground, lost friends for feet of mud, and wondered what any of it meant. Orders came down from officers who'd never seen combat. Maps didn't match terrain. Villages secured. One day were enemy territory the next. Morale didn't collapse all at once. It leaked like water through sandbags. A slow realization that no one at the top had any idea what they were doing. And yet, the fighting continued. Because that's what wars do when no one knows how to end them. The enemy that didn't need to win. Here's the cruel twist. The Viet Cong didn't have to win battles. They just had to make America tired of fighting them. They'd lose 10 men for every one American and still come back smiling. Because for them, war wasn't a strategy, it was life. They didn't measure progress in bodies or maps, just survival. America could bomb, burn, and bulldoze every inch of jungle, but the people would still be there. And as long as they were, the war would never end. The news war. For the first time in history, a war came home every night on TV. Footage of firefights, body bags, and crying children filled American living rooms. The reality was too raw to spin, too ugly to hide. The government said victory was close. The television said otherwise. Public trust cracked. Protests erupted. College students chanted what soldiers whispered in the field. Why are we here? It was the first war America started to lose before it finished fighting. The point of no return. By the late 1960s, Vietnam wasn't a war. It was an obsession. Each administration inherited a disaster and pretended it was strategy. Withdrawal wasn't an option because that meant admitting failure. So the machine kept turning. More troops, more bombs, more speeches about freedom. Meanwhile, the jungle stayed undefeated. When your enemy fights for survival and you fight for pride, there's only one way it ends. The infinite loop of futility. Every war has a climax. Vietnam had a cycle. Take a hill, lose it, bomb a village, rebuild it, declare victory, repeat. It was war as routine, and the soldiers, many barely out of high school, were trapped in a nightmare without a plot. One veteran said it best. We were winning every battle and still losing the war. That's because victory isn't about how many times you win. It's about whether any of it matters. The lesson no one learned. By the time America realized it couldn't win, it was too late to leave gracefully. Too many lives lost, too much money burned, too much ego at stake. The U.S. didn't lose because it was weak. It lost because it refused to admit it wasn't right. Vietnam wasn't a defeat of strength. It was a defeat of imagination. You can't solve a political problem with bombs. You can't win a people's war without their people. But hey, try telling that to the suits back home. The quiet ending. When the final helicopters lifted off from Saigon in 1975, there was no victory parade. Just silence and disbelief. 2 decades, millions of lives, and for what? The U.S. had entered Vietnam to prove a point. Instead, it became the point of how arrogance and fear can trap even superpowers. History would call it a conflict. The soldiers would call it hell. And the world would call it what it truly was, avoidable. Vietnam was the war no one could define, led by men who couldn't admit they were lost. It wasn't about communism or capitalism. It was about control. And control is the first casualty of every bad decision. America didn't lose to the jungle. It lost to its own certainty.